Tonight, fire and rain. In the east, record downpours bring neighborhoods to a stop and cause the earth to move. In the west, drought fuels the fires. Don Daler, Mark Strassman, and Begad Shaban are on the severe weather. The federal government names colleges that may not be doing what the law requires to fight sexual violence. Maurice Dubois has the list. Video is discovered of the final goodbyes before more than 200 high school kids died in a capsized ferry.
엄마 사랑해요. 아빠 사랑해요. 둘 다 사랑해요.
And Dr. John LaPook returns to the dailies. For 6 years, he's followed Carol's descent into Alzheimer's and Mike's rising resolve.
It is my duty, my responsibility to take care of it. It's not somebody else's responsibility.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Fire and water are causing major problems on opposite sides of the country tonight. The storm system that brought tornadoes to the south and the Midwest earlier this week have now caused torrential rain and flooding in the Northeast. This is Philadelphia. Flooding in the Florida Panhandle is suspected as the possible cause of a deadly gas explosion at a jailhouse. And heat, drought, and strong winds are feeding a wildfire in Southern California. We have a team of correspondents covering the extreme weather. First, Don Daler is along the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia.
5 feet of water surrounded buildings along the river. Sarah Friedrich watched as her apartment became an island.
It was intense. The water rose so quickly. All of a sudden, all at once, it just kind of overtook the banks, came racing up the road, following one of the semi-tracks.
The Philadelphia area received more rain in a day than it usually gets in a month. That's a city bus nearly underwater. 2 passengers and the driver had to be rescued. More than 60 people were pulled from flooded neighborhoods or cars. Some escaped in canoes. Parking lots looked like marinas in some places. Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter.
The Schuylkill River crested at 13.91 feet. That is actually higher than the Schuylkill was during Hurricane Irene and higher than it was during Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy.
5 inches of rain fell in New York City, its 10th wettest day on record. This mudslide just north of Manhattan shut down a section of track during rush hour. Regina Scammon lives in Queens. She estimates the damage to her home will cost thousands to repair.
How high did the water get? Is this the water line?
That's
here?
the water line.
Wow. So that's a good, what, 4.5, 5 feet?
I think so, yeah.
And have you ever seen it like that before?
Never.
Not even during Sandy?
No.
This is the Schuylkill River behind me. You can see it's still running much higher than normal. And Scott, there is still a flood warning in effect here until tomorrow afternoon.
Don, thanks. Now to that jailhouse explosion last night after the downpour in Florida. 2 inmates were killed, 180 people were injured. Mark Strassman is there. Mark?
Scott, this explosion could be heard by people living 20 miles from the jail. Stormwater flooded the area of the jail's natural gas lines, and investigators are looking at whether that may have been a factor. We were given a tour by Sheriff David Morgan. Where did it happen?
Okay, right at this very corner here, you see the post there that's been sheared off, basically the concrete and the rebar. Right below that, on what really is the first floor.
It flooded here
all the
yesterday.
All the way up to the ceiling.
It flooded all the way up to the ceiling?
All the way up to the ceiling.
Of the first floor?
Yes, sir.
Are there gas lines right back here?
There are, sir. The explosion was quite intense. Right above that, straight across, is where we know that there are 2 inmate bodies right now. Just again, the next floor up here. We have not recovered those 2 bodies yet because the fire marshal and the ATF have not cleared the building.
The surveillance camera video shows the moment of the blast. 600 people were inside the jail. 184 guards and inmates were loaded onto ambulances and buses and taken to 5 area hospitals.
Nobody can tell me anything about my son.
Sheila Travis confronted Sheriff Morgan outside the jail. She spoke to her son, inmate Kevin Johnson, 4 hours before the explosion.
The inmates was complaining of gas smell and that they were getting lightheaded and getting dizzy.
A law enforcement source told us that a number of inmates and corrections officers smelled gas for 20 hours before the blast. We were told they reported it and turned on fans and opened windows. The Escambia Board of County Commissioners is in charge of the jail and not the sheriff. If complaints about leaking gas are real and went ignored, Scott, Sheriff Morgan says this could become a criminal investigation.
And Mark, we've been hearing most of the day that 3 inmates were reported missing. What became of them?
They did a series of head counts and finally discovered one of those inmates had been transferred to another jail. The other 2 were being treated at local hospitals.
So a total of 2 dead. Mark, thank you very much. Now to the wildfire in hot, dry Southern California. Winds feeding the flames kicked up today. Hundreds of homes are threatened. Begad Shaban is there.
More than 700 firefighters have built containment lines to protect the homes along the foothills east of LA. Smoldering brush could reignite at any time, so Captain Luis De La Rosa and his team are digging them up and dousing them with water.
I'd say we got pretty lucky. We had the people in the right place. They got in, they took aggressive action safely, and they at least slowed it down, kind of lessened the intensity of it.
The fire grew from 20 acres to over 1,000 in just a few hours. Liz Brown has been fighting fires in California for 20 years.
What allowed this fire to get so big so quickly?
The wind. You have dry fuels, low humidity, hot weather, and in this case, lots of wind.
One gust topped 100 miles per hour. The winds are much calmer today, but residents in 1,600 homes have been warned they must be ready to leave with little warning. Higher temperatures and low humidity are expected through Saturday.
California usually has about 500 wildfires by this time of year, but there's already been more than 1,000. And Scott, the start of fire season is still a month away.
The very latest on this on CBS This Morning tomorrow. Begad, thank you very much. Today, for the first time, the federal government named colleges and universities that are facing investigations into their handling of sexual assaults. Maurice Dubois has this story.
Across the country, there's been a steady drumbeat of college students protesting what they call a lack of attention to sexual assaults on campuses. The government says 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted before graduation. Catherine Lehman is from the Department of Education.
The president and the vice president both strongly called for greater transparency and a movement across the country for us to change campus cultures so that we are making sure that all of our students are safe.
The 55 schools publicly named span from coast to coast and include renowned institutions such as Princeton, UC Berkeley, Vanderbilt, and Harvard. All 55 are under investigation for violating Title IX. That's the federal law requiring schools to advise victims of their rights, conduct investigations, and ensure victim safety. Harvard has had 100 cases of sexual assault reported over the last 3 years. Just last month, an assault victim there wrote an open letter in the college newspaper saying, "Our policy is so outdated and narrow in scope that it discourages survivors from entering an investigative process." Sarah Tedesco is part of a Title IX complaint against Emerson College in Boston.
We should be equipping those students with what they need to know if it does happen. It's an epidemic. There are students at other schools committing suicide because nobody's listening to them.
Both Emerson and Harvard are currently revising their sexual assault policies. 2 days ago, the White House announced plans to better educate universities on how to combat sexual violence on campus. Victim advocates like Colby Bruno think more can be done.
I'd like to see some other rules promulgated that hits a school where it hurts monetarily, and I think it would start to make schools pay attention to this.
And you'd like to see consequences?
I would like to see consequences.
And we want to be clear that the schools named here are under investigation, and that does not mean they are guilty. In addition to Harvard and Emerson, we also contacted Princeton, Vanderbilt, and UC Berkeley. All 5 universities told us they are fully cooperating with these investigations and are committed to improvement. Scott.
Maurice Dubois. Thank you, Maurice. We have the full list of all 55 schools and their responses for you on our website, cbsnews.com. Reports of sexual assault in the military rose by 50% last year. The Pentagon says today that the increase is mostly because of a new program that encourages victims to come forward. 14% of the reports came from male victims. There is no end to the suffering in Syria. Today, the dictatorship's aircraft bombed a crowded market in Aleppo, killing at least 33 civilians. Dozens were wounded. Witnesses say government troops rolled barrels packed with explosives out of helicopters. Aleppo is Syria's largest city. For 3 years now, the Assad regime and rebel forces have fought a vicious war to a stalemate. We were struck today by heartbreaking new videos from the ferry disaster off South Korea. In this one, trapped passengers are seen through the windows desperately trying to break the windows to escape. Rescuers just outside could do nothing as the ship sank. 213 people are confirmed dead, 89 are still missing. Most of the passengers were teenagers on a school trip. The father of one who died discovered video on his son's cell phone, which had been returned to the family. It shows the tragedy as it unfolded. He shared the video, saying that South Korea needs to see what went wrong. The teenagers were slow to grasp the danger. Announcements from the crew over the intercom told them to stay where they were, even as the ship was tipping over. Some cracked jokes. One said, "This is fun." Another said, "This is like Titanic," and began to sing. Others realized they were in serious trouble. One asked, "Should I call my mom?" "I should say, Mom, this might be the last words from me." Some struggled with their life jackets. One said, "This is going to be on the news." Another said, "Not unless it sinks." The reply, "It's sinking now." Another student was heard saying, "Mom, I love you. Dad, I love you. I love you both." The ship's captain was arrested for abandoning the passengers. He said the delay in the evacuation came because he didn't want to send them into the chilly water before rescuers arrived. The oil boom in the north is producing greater risk on the rails. And the mayor who smoked crack has another surprise when the CBS Evening News continues. Today, the Transportation Department proposed new rules to make rail tankers less likely to leak and explode after a derailment. It was just yesterday that 13 cars carrying crude oil derailed in Lynchburg, Virginia. It turns out the amount of crude oil moving by rail is growing rapidly across the country, but safety regulations are not. And Elaine Quijano's been looking into this.
Every day, mile-long trains from the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota pass through Albany, New York. Some carry 85,000 barrels of crude. The amount of Bakken oil transported by rail has increased 20-fold since 2008. But federal authorities say the chemical properties of Bakken crude make it more flammable than oil from other areas.
What keeps me up at night is a fear that I'll get a phone call or that I'll hear a boom.
Councilwoman Vivian Cornegay represents this Albany neighborhood.
You know, if something happens, they're all gone. These homes are no longer if something catastrophic is to happen here.
This train carrying Bakken crude derailed in North Dakota in December. This accident was in Alabama just weeks earlier. But it was this explosion that killed 47 people in Canada that terrified many who live in towns on the oil routes. Charlene Benton lives just 50 yards from the tracks in Albany.
What would you do if something happened?
What would I do? The only thing I could do is pray.
The industry is moving this stuff around every single day.
Department of Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox told us the rush of Bakken on the rails has forced his agency to act.
What you have is a proliferation of a new growth energy product in this country without a proliferation of inspectors, without a proliferation of, in many cases, the regime that needs to go along with making sure that everything is safe.
Railroads have already agreed to reduce speeds for oil trains and improve braking systems. But Vivian Cornegay wants oil trains rerouted around heavily populated areas.
There will be a next time. With all the amount of oil moving throughout this country, it's bound to be a next time. And I don't want that next time down here where my residents live.
The White House will review the safety proposals. We're told approval can take months. Elaine Quijano, CBS News, Albany, New York.
Malaysia has a sobering message for the families of Flight 370. That's next. Malaysia's government said today that air traffic controllers did not realize that Flight 370 was missing until 17 minutes after it disappeared from radar. It was 4 hours before a search was launched. The Boeing 777 vanished March 8th en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing with 239 people. Today, the airline told families to go home to China to wait for word. Today, the continuing saga of Toronto Mayor Rob Ford took another turn when he headed off to rehab. Ford, who's admitted to smoking crack, said nothing as he left his home. In a statement last night, he alluded to a drinking problem and said his re-election campaign is on hold. Today, a Canadian newspaper showed a new picture of Ford on its front page holding a crack pipe, apparently last weekend. The lawyer for fashion designers Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana said today he will appeal their tax fraud conviction to Italy's highest court. Yesterday, a judge gave them 18 months, but the sentence was suspended, so for Dolce and Gabbana, orange won't be the new black anytime soon. The Dailies have been married nearly half a century. They are closer than ever. A poignant story coming next. We're ending tonight with a love story. Mike and Carol. Many of you have met them before. We've been following them about 6 years now. Their love has withstood, and they will tell you, been strengthened by a challenge faced by more than 5 million American families. Here's Dr. John LaPook.
Every Friday, Mike and Carol Daly have dinner at their local Italian restaurant.
Happy birthday.
Tonight, they're celebrating Mike's 71st birthday. Carol, also 71, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's over a decade ago. Mike cares for her full time, even bringing her to the public library where he works.
Some rehearsal of memory tests. Right?
We first met the couple in 2008.
What's that?
Can't watch movies.
Why not?
Can't concentrate enough. Like, that went off too.
No Clark Gable.
Oh, so handsome.
We spoke again in 2011.
Do you remember Clark Gable?
Oh yeah, that was my... Yeah.
Who is he?
Oh, I...
Then, in 2012.
What can't you do now that you used to be able to do when you were perfectly fine?
Oh, I can go out, things I can't go out by myself.
And today, 6 years after our first meeting.
What's your husband's name?
My husband's?
Your husband's name?
Yeah.
The guy sitting to your left?
Yeah.
That big guy who loves you?
Yeah, loves me.
Family members like Mike spend 9 hours a day on average providing care for relatives.
You're still shouldering all of the burden. I mean, how are your shoulders?
They're sore, no doubt about it. But you have to do what you have to do.
Medicare does not pay for personal care at home for patients with Alzheimer's. Mike says he can't afford full-time or live-in help. Even part-time relief is problematic.
There are respite programs where people will come in and give you a break for a few hours once or twice a week.
I know Carol wouldn't accept it. That's the problem. When she said,
Why not?
It is my duty, my responsibility to take care of it. It's not somebody else's responsibility.
But would Carol have wanted Mike to bear that responsibility all by himself?
This is our first.
The Alzheimer's Association says families need to think back to a time when the patient was well and able to think clearly.
And who's that?
My mother. You.
Me, yeah, good. That'll be, you better say me.
In June, the Dailies will celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary.
We'll be the same as we started.
Laughter, love, and duty still hold them together as Carol's world shrinks and Mike's burden grows. Dr. John LaPook, CBS News, New York.
When we first met, Mike said this disease had brought he and his wife closer together. Doesn't seem like that's changed. That's the CBS Evening News for tonight. For all of us at CBS News, all around the world, good night.